Welcome to the first Salt Kubernetes working group meeting. Yay! This is us. And we're going to talk about Kubernetes modules. So Gareth, I was just saying before I hit record that I think the Kubernetes modules are also a really good modules. They're a really good group of modules that we probably need to pull into their own repo for Salt extensions. And Girl agrees, and I think that Nick probably does too. And those, if we know what we want to call that, Salt extensions Kubernetes, maybe, or we could give it a code name like Project Ginger or something, you know. Project Curry. I'm good with that, whatever you guys want to do. Evocative names are also okay, because Kubernetes is long, and I think that we can't truncate it, even though we do in like the other things. If we make a separate repo for it, we probably can't.
We couldn't use the usual abbreviation in the repo name of Kate's.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I mean, just keep that in mind.
Yeah. I mean, it would make sense to just keep it as the regular name, just so it's easier to find, just so people know and it's obvious what it is.
Yeah, I think that's wise, so that it's more searchable in GitHub. And that one, I would assume that we would just make another repo, that we wouldn't want another org for that. But I guess that could be determined, because these are two things that are working together. It's Salt and Kubernetes, so that would make sense that it would be still in our org.
Yeah, I think that's fine, at least initially.
Yeah.
I'd see, like, possibly sometime in the future down the road, we might, like, if there's more interest from community people to take over it, we could move it out.
Yeah, and I think there's a number of people that are working on Kubernetes and sort of the greater VMware that we haven't completely met yet. And that may change things there, and that's fine. We can make changes as we need to. Some of the things that I wanted to go over today, though, were just some real basics. I put this meeting on thinking, well, we can try this time and see if the first Tuesday of the month works for people, and kind of talk through like kind of some objectives, maybe even some milestones or some things that we're thinking about, and just kind of walk through some of those things. And I'll take some notes and see if we can gather enough today to put together sort of the basics of a charter. And that's not like a required piece, but I think that it helps us all to be like, oh yeah, that's what we're working towards, right? It's this, and this is where we, you know, the charter is just like, oh, here's where the project board is, here's where some tasks are, this is what time we meet, this is who I can contact, and that's all that's for. And this time worked with the other working groups that are already sort of meeting throughout the month. So I kind of picked it because of that, but I'm open to other days or times if this time isn't the perfect time for people. And then after that, let's talk about some Kubernetes modules.
So one of the things that I was curious about was specifically what people are looking to use Salt and Kubernetes for. Like if it's strictly like management of Kubernetes, or people are using Salt within Kubernetes, wanting to install and set up Kubernetes, yeah, orchestrate Kubernetes with Salt, or all of the above.
Yeah, so what I'm looking into is actually how to run Salt, especially masters, as a proper Kubernetes service. So it's about leveraging all capabilities that Kubernetes offers in a proper way. And for example, the networking model has some conflicts with the way 0MQ works. Another aspect is that the individual masters are not really cluster aware. They're not aware of the other masters, which is something that's often been done when running complex multi-node services in Kubernetes. So there are a few things I want to learn about and maybe work on. But I'm very early in the journey of diving into this. I have a few upcoming projects where this will be relevant, and so I just try to find into the whole Salt plus Kubernetes world. I have a lot of experience individually with each of them, but not combined in terms of running Salt on top of Kubernetes.
Yeah, I've been using a lot Salt and Kubernetes together since, I don't know, 2 years, primarily for deployment. So to install Kubernetes masters, to install workers, to generate certificates, CA certificates, and then use etcd, which is kind of brain cluster brains of Kubernetes, to generate its clusters, to join individual nodes together. So basically, I've been using Sol for complete Kubernetes configuration and management. It's not only deployment, but it's like, as well as post-installation tasks like installing Hipster, installing Grafana, Prometheus, etc. So the complete, so all possible stack basically, which runs on top of Kubernetes, Calico, for example, etc. So I probably have to publish this somewhere on GitHub because it's quite a huge state, and it's a lot of Jinja files. Probably I have to do that, and maybe we might cook something on top of that. And it supports airbag, like authentication, authorization. It supports TLS. It supports IPv6, etc. So it's pretty huge. But it's not like, so this is like a lot of state files, a lot of Jinja files, and getting done like preparing module out of this would be a bit challenging, I think. But it's worth the efforts.
Sure. Do we know how many modules that are around Kubernetes within the Salt code base today? Does anybody have any idea, Gareth? Do you know? I know there's a few, but
I think
not actually.
modules, there are, well, there was two execution modules, and one was considered the I think there was like Kubernetes and then like a Kates, and then the Kates one was like the updated version because some things had
Oh, I see.
changed. So that was one of the other things I wanted to mention was like we need to, I think I said during, I can't remember if it was during an open hour or during like an internal core team, like we should no longer do that. We should no longer say, okay, this is the next generation module. This is just like deprecate the old and then start to move to the new with like newer functions. Because it just gets too confusing when we have multiple versions of multiple modules. But I think, yeah, today I think there are two modules. Actually, no, there's three.
There's three.
There's a Kates, there's a Kube admin, and then there's a Kubernetes mod.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and probably Kube admin is just mimics Kube admin behavior, so just probably I will look into what it does. What exactly? Okay, it creates some kind of token for kubeadmin, so probably it just prepares the environment to run kubeadmin and deploy the cluster. I've never used it before, kubeadmin. I mean the salt kubeadmin module. I have to try this.
Yeah, and I think even if there's only a handful of them that we want to iterate on, pulling them into Assault extensions probably makes more sense because I think that they update and iterate much faster, much faster than Salt does. And so I think that would be ideal in order to attempt to keep up, which sounds impossible as I say it out loud, but that's okay. Impossible can be fun sometimes.
Yeah, it seems kubeadmin module just joins nodes together. And it seems it doesn't update the cluster itself because I think it's still in to do, like upgrade individual nodes or put the nodes into maintenance mode, because you cannot upgrade just like run apt update, apt upgrade, or yarn update upgrade on Kubernetes. You have to put the cluster into maintenance mode first, like put the individual nodes out of the cluster and then upgrade them individually. So it seems like it's not implemented yet into kubeadmin module, but it has a lot of features here already. That's good.
And so then the Kates is the one that's been updated the most recently. Is that right?
Which one?
K8s.py. Looks like it was updated last month, but then the Kubernetes mod.py was also updated last month. So I'm not sure which one's which.
Okay.
Let's go. We should probably look at these. So module to manage Kubernetes cluster is the Kates.py.
And Kubernetes module is basically what it does. It just like shows all possible, not all possible, but some of configuration options of the cluster, like show me namespaces, services, deployments, etc. So it's pretty similar to kubectl, to what kubectl does, but it's pretty limited in its functionality as far as I can see right now.
I think we might actually have that backwards. I think the Kubernetes module is more up to date than the Kates one.
So the difference is one is for the Kates is for managing clusters, and the Kubernetes mod is module for handling Kubernetes calls.
Yeah, it's basically to look into the configuration options,
Okay.
into existing environment, how cluster is configured, etc. So it's
I gotcha.
mostly
Okay.
read-only parameters you have there.
Yeah, it looks like this Kates one does create stuff, but it's very limited when it's creating. It's mostly labels and secrets. It's all labels
Right.
and secrets.
In all modules, we lack the ability right now to create the cluster in general, like to deploy it, right? So we have some kind of functionality here and there in all modules, but we have nothing like fire up module and create Kubernetes cluster. will like this kind of functionality right now.
So would you want to use one of these and enhance it, or would you want a new module for that?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, because we might separate functionality inside of execution modules and say like, we have one module for deployment, for creating cluster, another one, like let's say to create certificates, generate certificates, another one configure master configuration, worker configurations. So I think it's good to separate the logic.
I do too. Okay.
And then we have a lot of add-ons like Helm, Core DNS, dashboards, ingresses like enginings, ingresses, etc. And this would be another module, probably. I don't know if people here have some kind of experience deploying Kubernetes in general, not only with the salt stack, but I mean like with kubeadm, with kubespray, or like manually, if anyone did that before.
I did, but this was already 4 or 5 years ago, and I believe a lot of has changed since then. Because initially, actually, SaltStack was the basically go-to tool for spinning up Kubernetes clusters. But I think since then they abandoned mostly their SaltStack states to do this. And so I got a little bit out of touch with the whole Kubernetes low-level world. I can't really tell what's nowadays the go-to tool to handle the Kubernetes cluster setup.
Right. So right now you have two possibilities. You can deploy it with kubeadm or with kubespray. Kubespray is based on Ansible, which is ridiculously slow comparing to kubeadm, and kubeadm is like a Google baby, which is written in Golang, quite fast but quite buggy. So and there is no easy way, there is no magic button, magic pill to deploy Kubernetes, like do it like very easy. So there is absolutely no way to do that. It's very complex. It's a pretty complicated thing.
Well, that's not entirely true. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up in this working group was cluster API. So I don't know if that should have a home inside of Salt Cloud, working more with infrastructure, or have a home as modules inside the rest of the code base. But with cluster API, basically you just point at whatever infrastructure you're trying to interface with, and it handles the deployment of your Kubernetes cluster. And that's pretty valuable. I think that it definitely needs to be covered inside of the working group. I'm just not sure where it's going to live.
That's a good point. Yeah, and there's a lot of sort of spin-offs as well, like simple netties and things like that, that I'm not sure that that's things we want to cover, especially right now, but we may touch on it as we start doing some other things. And this is where I think it's going to, like you mentioned, Nick, it's going to become important that we probably collaborate with some of the other working groups like Salt Cloud and stuff to make sure that we're kind of aligned with where we're going and how things live and have homes. And I can help coordinate that as we look at what those things are and come up with some real specifics to discuss. I don't think it'll take a ton of time, and a lot of it can probably be done in the channels in Slack, and then just disseminating that out, in some sort of fashion that it gets, it's well known and well communicated out, and I can help there. So that's all I wanted to say about that. But I think having those conversations has sometimes been where we've tripped up. We haven't always connected those dots. And then if we haven't always communicated it out. So that's where I can help you guys to make those connections. Make sure that happens. So we have a few more people that have joined. Welcome. Does this date and time meet for people to work for people to meet and get that out? Sort of the first Tuesday of the month. And then I did make a channel in Slack that is, I may actually update that channel name to be something about working groups or WG or something like that. It's just a Kate's for now. But I've been thinking about all the channel names, that maybe the channels that are specific to the working groups should have like WG in them or something like that, so that's well known and have the topics. And hopefully that works for people. Are there any other objectives or goals or things people are looking to see happen or interested in that we could, even just write down as ideas today?
I've been sort of shuffling between things, so I might have missed some of it. I heard somebody mention running Salt on Kubernetes, which is certainly something that I think if we had a guide or something like that, or if we ran into any, particular gotchas, would be a nice resource to have. But I'm really interested in what it is, as Gareth said, like what it is that people are trying to use this for. Because from a module perspective, the execution modules, I think, have a place, right? Like covering all of the things. But I'm really interested in where people see the state modules shaking out in the ecosystem, right? We have deployment tools currently. So, how does Salt fit into that? Is it working with them? Is it leveraging them? Is it, trying to replace them? Looking at the current states right now, you have individual absent presence for different kinds, right? You have config maps and deployments and namespaces and things like that, absent present for each. And, working with Kubernetes deployments, that doesn't really fit into how people deploy things, right? Like nobody's going to say, hey, here's my individual absent present for these individual resources. A lot of times it's, I have a YAML file with multiple different objects in it. I have a directory full of YAML files that are, going to get deployed. I have a Helm chart that I'm trying to deploy out. And, Helm uses its own Go templating and things like that. So like, how do we see states in particular working into Salt's ecosystem?
Question.
Well, it's good to know that nobody else has come up with an answer to that, because I'm sure struggling.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's one of the
things that,
things
sorry,
we
go
want to
ahead,
talk
Sage.
about. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think it's something we need to discuss. Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I've just kind of played around with Kubernetes and Salt, kind of along those lines of what Nick was talking about, was basically just deploying things into a cluster, like adding pods, adding services, adding things like that. So basically, just like your basic management of. My cat wants to weigh in on this. Adding like basic stuff into a cluster, things like that. It hasn't been so much about the actual the configuration of the cluster or the installation of a cluster, just because that's such a complicated thing to automate. I'm interested in this thing you mentioned, cluster API, because that could be definitely something to look at.
Yeah, I think that there definitely needs to be a push towards that, because that's your front end, right? We don't necessarily need to say, hey, how are we going to automate the deployment of a Kubernetes cluster if we just say, hey, we're leveraging cluster API and they do a bunch of the hard work and we just, implement it.
Definitely.
I think that that's kind of your easy button in order to deploy on a lot of different frameworks. And I agree that there's probably not a whole lot of value to concentrate too much on the configuration of Kubernetes aside from cluster API. But I still just hone in on, like, I'm looking at this list of states here for deploying things into Kubernetes, and I just don't see where I would ever use this. At least not in its current form. If I had, Kubernetes, I'm going to pass in, the location of some YAML files that I want to template out with Jinja instead of Go templating, and then jam them into the cluster. And it's not reliant upon, me knowing what kind of stuff I'm trying to deploy up front. I think that could have some value, right? But like me having to separate out, oh, here's my config map. I'm going to call config map present, and here's the individual file that I'm looking to deploy. Like that's not how production Kubernetes deployments happen. So, the existing states right now really conflict with my general view on how Kubernetes deployments happen. Building out the execution modules, I think, has a lot of value because you can write logic into your states and things like that, and do some pre-work, do some discovery, whatever it is that you need to do in order to make decisions. But the states themselves, I just don't see a whole lot of value there. And if we became vaguer with what the states did, right, we were just like, hey, we just have this general Kubernetes state that we can like point to the directory and template out files in there, or, just raw static files and jam it into Kubernetes cluster. I think that that could have some value depending on how it's implemented. I'm not sure if anybody has seen KAPP, KAPP, but it kind of does the state diff type of stuff that we expect out of Salt. So if we had like a similar workflow to what that does, that might be interesting. But with KAPP, right, like you don't have to tell it what you're deploying, right? You just point to the files that you're trying to deploy. And if you make changes to those, then KAPP says, oh, you're about to deploy this thing. This one label has changed. This one annotation has changed. You're adding this new object, whatever. And it shows you, with your green, red, plus minus diff type of format, what's about to happen. And then you say, yeah, go for it. And so I think that having a similar workflow inside Salt would be cool. But I think that these existing states, we keep them for fun, but I would never use them myself.
I mean, I feel like we could potentially get pretty close to what you were describing with some work with what the states that exist today, like leveraging things like test equals true. That would give you kind of like an initial, this is what it's going to do preview, and then you could run it again without the test equals true to actually apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, am I making sense? I feel like sometimes I don't make sense. I just sort of ramble on and on.
I think so. Yeah, I think I'm at least I'm understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, so I agree as well, because if we focus too much on states, then on the one hand, we could say, okay, we just provide a very generic state, which ensures a generic resource is deployed and present. And on the other hand, the other extreme would be, okay, we try to implement every possible resource that's out there and try to keep up with the world out there of a lot of custom resources, like the whole crossplane, for example, which introduces a whole another set of resource types. So I believe actually if we try to play this catch-up game, that's only a game to lose, because you invest a lot of manpower, you will be always lagging behind what's out there. And on the other hand, also what you previously said, I also don't see how states would play in a real world production scenario a huge role, because that's basically just adding another layer of complexity into your Kubernetes deployment pipelines, where you could possibly just pipe through your YAML files or whatever service definitions from your pipeline without having salt in between. So yeah, I believe that the execution modules is where the value is, and you could build actually stuff like CAP or so on top of it.
Is there any specific functionality you would like to see in execution module, or what type of functionality would be appropriate for execution module?
I think
do exactly-
anything that you can do with kube control is fair game, right? You know, it looks like there's a lot of things that you can do in the modules currently around creation, deletion, but I think that really, like, I don't know what the shows do, if that's more of a describe or a get, but you know, I think that that would really be a lot of the functionality that I would want to see, right? Is the fact finding inside the execution modules. You know, I can look up to see things in the cluster, the state of them, you know, anything descriptive, and then take action based upon that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it's a good point, I think. Yeah.
I was just reading Eric's comments. I don't know if you want to elaborate more of them on them. Voice, like, tell us a bit like about your, like, what you're using Salt and Kubernetes with, like, today, Eric.
Sorry, I was on mute.
No worries, no worries.
Bit unsure how these meetings works because I'm just like kind of now starting to get into the SaltStack community a bit. But we're using it both to like deploy the entire Kubernetes clusters and deploy our pods and components into the Kubernetes clusters. But we are a little bit confused, like where SaltStack is going with Kubernetes, because it kind of seems that it's both like using a very old module and not like all the native functions exist. So we have to do like a little bit of kubectl commands in our states.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the issues that Nick and Elias were kind of alluding to, was the modules that we have currently. They haven't really kept up with the developments, or they haven't like kept up on in line with Kubernetes and the Kubernetes API that we utilize. And so a lot of stuff is missing. And so there is a lot of things that you can't do with the current modules, and you have to rely on kubectl or kubectl.
Yeah, and it kind of seems as well like when you do that, it's kind of hard to have the total integration. Like when you run a test equals true, it doesn't really understand what's it's testing. So
Yeah,
just kind of hoping that it will work.
I mean, I think that would be an interesting kind of exercise. There is identifying what. I mean, you're probably a good source for it, because you have had to, like, use kubectl for a lot of the pieces that are missing, and just identify what pieces are missing in the execution module, and see about adding them in.
Yeah, actually, I have a colleague, Felix, that has been trying to help fixing that Python module for like a newer version in SaltStack. But he was like told like, yeah, just set up the entire test environment and everything. He was a bit overwhelmed with how much stuff it was.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I mean,
there was
that's
also some dependency on like another library that he was confused about.
yeah. I mean, that's one of the, like at the start of the meeting. I don't know if you missed or you caught Sage's comment before she had to drop, was us kind of using this work as a moving this work into like a Salt extension. So it's part of the Salt project, but it's in its own repository, and that way, like getting changes into it, it doesn't require I mean, still, like we would still want tests, but it doesn't require the full Salt test. It doesn't require like the full Salt's kind of development test cycle for the whole project. It's like we narrow the scope into its own repository. That way, like any changes get into it quicker and smoother.
Oh, okay. Well, it will be interesting to follow, and me and my colleague will happily give like input and help what we can.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just reading Elias's last comment. So he's saying his focus is running multi-masters as Kubernetes services. Yeah, I'd be curious if he's looking to run. I mean, I would imagine so. Looking to run them as pods in the cluster, providing salts for like one or multi, basically like multi-masters, like for a specific cluster of pods. That'd be interesting. So currently, are you running? Did I catch the comment right, Eric, that you were running Salt inside Kubernetes pods today?
No, we're
No,
running
you're
them
not,
as VMs,
Okay.
the masters and stuff. But yeah, I guess that would be kind of cool to run it in Kubernetes as well. But I mean, I guess that's where everything is going into Kubernetes.
Right. Any other comments or input, Nick, Kirill, you have?
Just sitting and thinking about the running Salt inside of Kubernetes. What kind of value does it have, like in general? Because I mean, I think it's doable, but what kind of issue it should solve, or what kind of problems? That's an interesting topic. Yeah, I have to think about that.
It's like,
Yeah.
that's a conversation that I often have about any application, right? But it seems like the bottom line is, people are often like, well, I got this Kubernetes cluster. Let's see how many things I can jam inside of it. And so you have some interesting applications in there, right? Like, I've seen people inside of AWS running databases inside EKS clusters when they have RDS like right next to them. I'm like, well, why aren't we just using this? I mean, this seems like a better solution. But
Right.
I think that you're probably always going to have like, well, I have this reason, and this is why I want to do it. And I don't know about multi-master, but like standing up like salt masters inside of a Kubernetes cluster, even just for like testing purposes, seems like it would have some value. The thing is that it's stateful, so we would have to make sure that we're capturing like all of the important things like your PKI directory and other stuff. So, but I think having a guide that would say like, hey, here's the things that you need to take into consideration if you're going down this road. I think that's a reasonable deliverable to have. So I think my main question, I guess, coming off of this first meeting is, are we going to have any actions coming off this first meeting, or is this just sort of like aggregating information and then we can figure out what direction we're going to head next time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just going to quick comment on running salt in the container. To me, I think it would be like a good way to like be able to test and for people in the community to test upcoming versions as they're kind of as like we're going through the RC process for releases. It would be a good way for them to like quickly spin up, in theory, quickly spin up a like a copy of their current environments with the RC version, and just kind of run through like basic state runs and just see like, okay, what works, what doesn't work. As far as like action items, I'm like I said, I'm curious to see what is currently missing. What are the missing pieces in the existing Kubernetes modules? And then the answer to that question that I asked for at the start was like, what are people looking to do with Salt and Kubernetes? Just if we could get some kind of basic like answers to that question. Like, is it like controlling Kubernetes, running Salt in Kubernetes, configuring Kubernetes, like all the things, like just what the use case is that people are looking for.
Do you think we could post some sort of form or I don't know, online spreadsheet or whatever would be a good format, even if it's like a Slack poll or something like that with a bunch of options in it, in order to aggregate the information from, I guess, a wider audience. There's not too many people in the Kate's channel right now. So if we could like throw something up on announcements maybe and say, hey, look, we're just trying to get some info. Maybe we get some people biting on that.
Yeah, no, that would be a good idea. And that would potentially give just some like advertisement of like the effort to kind of shore up the Kubernetes supports. Is it possible that there's more people out there that are interested in it? They just didn't know like the working group. They don't know the working group exists.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have to advertise it a little bit more. And
yeah, but I like that idea, Nick, of just kind of doing a survey of either a Google form or like a Slack poll or something, just to gauge like what the general interest level and interest in general is of where Salt fits within Kubernetes.
yeah, probably have to announce it on Slack and write some kind of maybe a wiki, or I don't know, some kind of with some kind of information about that we're working on that, and we would like people's input on that. Yeah,
for sure. I can sync up with Sage after this, and we can figure out like what we want to do. Because I think they've done, like her and Janae have done a couple different polls in community Slack over a couple things. So they might have something that they like to use that works well.
Yep. Okay.
Any other final comments? Eric, do you have anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what the advantages would be like to run the salt master in Kubernetes. Would that like maybe be redundancy and scalability, or? I'm not really sure like how salt scales.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what you're doing with it, but for the most part, salt scales really well. It's not uncommon for like a single master to be managing like several thousand minions. But yeah, like having redundancy is always a good idea.
Okay, I think we are more or less done.
All right. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, unless there's any final thoughts, we can end a bit early, give everyone back some time.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Thank you,
Sounds
guys.
good.
Yep.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.